The Gamble, a nation's last card. June 1944. Dawn over the Philippine Sea is thin and pale, an ocean of glass stretching to the horizon. Out in that glass, like chess pieces arranged for a final gamble, the Imperial Japanese fleet moves with a sense of desperate purpose. They call it Operation A-Go, Japan's last great hope to stop America's steady march across the Pacific. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa stands with his staff aboard the flagship, eyes fixed on charts, fingers tapping the thin paper lines that mark islands and fuel lanes. Around him, captains argue, air officers confer, and the carriers, pride of an empire, breathe in the morning air, steel and canvas and names like Shokaku and Taiho etched across bow plates. The plan is simple in rhetoric and brutal in logic. Draw the U.S. fleet into a single decisive engagement, one massive carrier strike to cripple Task Force 58 before it can support the landings on Saipan. Japan hopes to reverse momentum, to shock the United States into a pause, to buy time. But plans on paper are not battles at sea. They don't count submarines stalking under waves, hungry, patient, and invisible. They don't count the hours of training the enemy pilot carries like armor. Ozawa believes in the sword, the carrier strike. He pins his hopes on range, on the shock of numbers, on the skill of veteran pilots who once ruled the Pacific skies. Yet beneath the surface of that hope lies a problem no chart can hide. Japan's pilot corps is a shadow of what it once was. The veterans who smashed through Pearl Harbor and swept the Solomons have been lost in years of attrition. Training programs shortened. Replacements are young with a few dozen flight hours, not the hundreds their predecessors knew. Japan can still build planes in theory, but it cannot rebuild experience overnight. And while Ozawa gathers his carriers, the United States has been doing something Japan failed to account for. It has been integrating technology, training, and production into one single machine. Admiral Mark A. Mitcher, across the water, commands Task Force 58, a fast, flexible armada bristling with fighters, torpedo planes, and radar pickets. Mitcher trusts not only in steel, but in systems. Radar screens feeding fighter direction centers, combat air patrols placed like chess knights across the sky, and pilots trained in simulated combat until their reflexes are second nature. Where Japan hopes to surprise, the Americans have made surprise a little harder to achieve. And between the two fleets, invisible and lethal, the American submarine force moves like a predator in fog, scouting, reporting, and when the moment is right, striking oilers and carriers where it hurts most. By June 15th, American troops are already landing on Saipan. The die is cast. The Japanese fleet moves to meet the threat with all the courage left to it. Ozawa believes one day can reverse weeks of losses. One coordinated strike, one day to buy a year. But in war, a single day can also be the moment a long accumulating advantage finally snaps a nation's strategy like brittle glass. The fleets close, the air holds its breath, and somewhere, deep in the ocean, a torpedo waits to write a new line in the story. Gathering the fleet, numbers, and confidence. June 16th and 17th, the maps begin to blur with ink and motion. In Japanese signal rooms, teletypes click and officers trace projected headings. Admiral Ozawa's carriers form a line of steel. Fleet carriers, light carriers, escorting battleships and cruisers, all assembled with grim determination. The names are weighty: Shokaku and Zoikaku, carriers that survived early war glory, and Taiho, the newest of the fleet, pride of Japanese shipbuilding with armored flight decks and advanced systems meant to keep it alive in a modern war. They are stacked with aircraft, Zeros for escort, Vows for dive bombing, Judys for torpedo runs, hundreds of wings, a winged spear to straighten American resolve. On the American side, Task Force 58 forms up under Admiral Mitcher. Fast carriers like Enterprise and Essex move with a new doctrine: relentless air patrols, radar-directed interceptions, and a redundancy of aircraft that Japan cannot match. Mitcher's carrier air groups are deep. Fighters like the Grumman F-6F Hellcat, torpedo-equipped Avenger squadrons, and the dauntless dive bombers, each replacing losses quickly with planes produced by American industry in numbers that feel like a tide. Confidence rises in both fleets, but for different reasons. Ozawa begs destiny, veteran pilots, tradition, and a final decisive blow. Mitcher trusts systems, radar, pilot hours, combat direction, and the unmatchable weight of American production. Behind Ozawa's line, junior officers whisper about fuel. Japan's logistics have strained. Fuel tankers run long routes, vulnerable, and even now U.S. submarines patrol those lanes. Fuel becomes a quiet enemy. One torpedo can doom a carrier not immediately, but over weeks, as aircraft are kept grounded and engines unable to spin. Both admirals sail on the edge of a sword. Ozawa's strategy is a high-stakes bluff. If he wins, he halts the invasion. If he loses, Japan's carrier force will be shattered beyond quick repair. Mitcher knows this and positions his carriers not to be lured, but to use the enemy's aggression against them. Radar picket ships and escort carriers extend the reach of Task Force 58. Picket planes circle, combing the sea for threats. When scouts report contact, fighter direction officers swing Hellcats into position far beyond the horizon where Japanese pilots expect only ocean. The chessboard is set. The pieces move. Scouts are launched. Submarines stalk. Pilots check their instruments and think of home. And while the human element dominates these decks, fear braided with duty, technology begins to quietly tilt the game. Radar blips, sonar pings, the hum of engines in the pre-dawn, these are the new instruments of victory. By June 18th, both sides know the fight is coming. Messages fly, pilots strap in, the great gamble tightens into a confrontation. And in the quiet hours before dawn on the 19th, someone will spot the wrong blip at the wrong time, and that sighting will start a cascade no one can stop.
The American machine, radar, training, and production. To call the U.S. Navy well-supplied is to understate the truth. By 1944, American industry had become a vast workshop of war. Planes rolled off assembly lines like raw truth, engines turned out in volume, and the logistical web stretched from factories to distant atolls. But industry alone would not have been decisive without integration, the marriage of hardware, training, and doctrine. Radar is the first note. On American picket ships and carriers, operators watched glowing screens and plotted incoming aircraft long before human eyes could see them. Radar gave a voice to distance, an early warning that allowed fighter direction officers to vector Hellcats into interception courses far from the fleet, turning an approaching Japanese wave into a predictable, controllable element. Hellcats, Grumman F-6Fs, were designed to be forgiving, robust, and deadly. They could climb, turn, and deliver firepower while withstanding hits that would cripple earlier designs. American pilots had training regimens that emphasized gunnery, formation fighting, and simulated attacks. Their hours in the air were not just practice, they were the craft's memory. Then there was doctrine. Admiral Mitcher and commanders across Task Force 58 treated the ocean like a theater to be managed. Fighters on station, torpedo bombers held ready, dive bombers kept primed for sudden opportunities. Communications were rehearsed. Radio calls, vector coordinates, and salvo timings moved like a practiced dance. Commanders used radar vectors to push fighters to interception points measured in miles, not minutes. Production fed those doctrines. While Japan had excellent engineers and brave crews, it could not match the American assembly lines. Aircraft, replacement parts, and fuel flowed. Carriers could be refitted and refueled. Air groups could be replenished. Losses were costly, but survivable. The Americans learned fast, too. Lessons from the Solomons, from Guadalcanal, fed back into tactics. Torpedo attack profiles changed. Anti-aircraft belts tightened. The U.S. Navy became a learning organism, one that could iterate its tactics far faster than Japan could respond. This combination, radar for detection, Hellcats for interception, and a doctrine that turned information into action was lethal in June of 1944. On the morning the Japanese launched their waves, radar would call out the incoming formations long before any pilot saw the ocean's surface break with approaching wings. A single line on a glowing screen would become a corridor of death for inexperienced pilots. As the fleets closed, American pilots hunched behind canopies, waiting for the vector. They did not yet know that the morning would be described later as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, a name that hides a grim calculus of training versus chance, technology versus tradition. But in those seconds before contact, every pilot trusted the systems beneath them and the men on the ground who had taught them how to fight as a network, not as isolated heroes. And networks are merciless when their nodes amplify one another. A radar cue, a fighter vector, a coordinated barrage, layers of defense stacking until the attacker finds himself meeting steel after steel with nowhere left to hide. Submarines and intelligence, the quiet killers. Behind the thunder of carriers and the roar of fighters, another war is being fought, a quieter, colder war beneath the waves. American submarines in the days leading up to June 19th prowled the shipping lanes like wolves in fog, their periscopes skimming the ocean surface as if testing the skin of the world. These boats were not designed to fight great fleet actions. They were designed to strangle the enemy's logistics, sinking tankers, burning stores, and sometimes, like fate's quick blade, hitting the carriers themselves. In the first days of the Marianas Campaign, subs such as USS Albacore, Kavala, and others found targets of opportunity. They struck at the heart of the Japanese supply chain, oilers and tankers that kept carrier air groups flying. A torpedo in a fuel tank is not just an explosion, it is a slowly developing death. Planes grounded, ranges cut, sorties reduced. The Japanese had built a navy meant to project power across islands, but that projection relied on long fuel lines. Cut the lines small enough, and the whole plan becomes shaky. Intelligence played an equal role. Allied codebreakers and reconnaissance pushed information toward admirals who could use it. By 1944, the Allies were more adept at reading Japanese communications and estimating fleet movements. This advantage meant American commanders could place submarines and picket ships where they would bite. It meant radar pickets were more likely to see an incoming flight, and it meant that Admiral Michener often had more information than his counterpart. On June 19th, it wasn't just the fighters and gunners who won the morning. It was also a torpedo from a submarine that found Taiho, Japan's new crucible of naval design. The carrier did not go down instantly. Her crew fought damage control with desperate resolve, but a ruptured aviation fuel tank and subsequent fires turned the flagship into a burning coffin. Then later, USS Kavala found and struck Shokaku. Both sinkings were blows that removed centers of air power from Japan's fleet, blows that could not be quickly repaired. The silent service had shown a principle war planners have always known in whispers. Logistics and information win as many battles as courage and steel. In one morning, directed by radar and sharpened by intelligence, American submarines and fighters blunted a carrier strike that Japan hoped would change the course of the war. June 15th. On the beaches of Saipan, the first waves of U.S. Marines and soldiers come ashore in a churn of surf, smoke, and steel. On the island, soldiers dig in and feel the immediate brutality of a fight for territory that means more than sand and coral. It means runway space. It means the ability to place B-29 bases within direct reach of the Japanese home islands. For the Japanese High Command, Saipan is not merely an island. It is a line in the sand that, if crossed, brings the war to their doorstep. They cannot allow the Americans to anchor long-range bombers so close. Inside Ozawa's fleet, tension spikes. Time is short. The Marianas must be defended, and the only plan left is a decisive, crushing blow to the carrier force that supports the landings. They launch their waves with ritual precision. Dive bombers and torpedo squadrons catapult into the broad blue, pilots grunting into oxygen masks, hands white on control sticks, hearts tight with the knowledge that this mission may not bring them home. On the American carriers, CAPs, combat air patrols, hold like sentries. Pilots sip the last of their coffee, glance at their guns, and listen to the faint crackle of the fighter direction nets. A radar blip becomes a commanded turn. Vector left, climb now, push to intercept. What the Japanese pilots do not realize is that the moments they need for approach are being stolen from them by modern detection. A Hellcat meets a Judy 30 miles out. The Japanese formation, expecting to arrive en masse at an unguarded fleet, finds itself sliced by trained fighters, funneled into fields of anti-aircraft fire. Back on Saipan, the naming of beaches, the placement of artillery, the laying of supply lines, these are the mundane threads that translate strategic decisions into human work. The soldiers advancing inland do not see the chess match above. They only feel its consequences in the sudden hush when air cover arrives, or the scream of dive bombers that never come. If Ozawa's plan worked, if the carriers could be blunted, the landings might be repelled or at least delayed. The stakes are not theoretical. They are sandbags, radio transmissions, blood, and the will to hold another day. But the morning of June 19th will not go as the Japanese envisioned. The first waves run into a defensive lattice of radar, interceptors, and anti-aircraft fire so well drilled it moves like a machine, not a collection of individuals. Planes fall from the sky before they reach launch point. Torpedo runs break apart under gunnery. And above all, the Japanese discover what attrition has hidden, that replacing pilots is not the same as replacing planes. As the smoke over Saipan starts to clear, one fact becomes impossible to ignore. The islands will not be taken back by a single strike. The tide of American industry and the new tactics at sea have made that kind of reversal unlikely. Saipan's sands will be soaked in struggle, and the fate of Japan's plan will hinge on the morning's air battles.
The air assaults. Waves into a radar net. June 19th. Dawn breaks with deceptive calm, a blue dome of sky over an ocean that has already decided to become history. From the Japanese carriers, aircraft climb in disciplined waves, Zeros as escorts, Vows and Judies as the strike. Hundreds of aircraft formed into a spear to drive into the American fleet. On the American side, radar operators in small, dark rooms trace those approaching specks like surgeons preparing a difficult operation. Numbers tick up on their scopes. Fighter directors smooth the chaos into commands: climb, steer, intercept. The first Japanese wave travels a long route, over water, low and fast, hoping to arrive the enemy blind and vulnerable. Instead, they meet Hellcats vectored precisely into their path. Imagine a formation that expects to run a gauntlet of ships and instead finds itself stepping into an invisible wall of fighters. The Hellcats slice through formations, concentrating fire on torpedo planes before they can line up their runs. For the Japanese, trained in bold, close-range attacks, this is unfamiliar and deadly. The sky becomes a shredded tapestry. Dive bombers are snapped out of their runs by ack-ack belts that bloom like iron flowers in the air. Torpedo planes that survive to the waterline find the sea lit with flak and the wake of destroyer maneuvers. It is not just better guns, it is the choreography of a radar-directed defense. Fighters intercept early, then withdraw after the heavy hitters. Dive bombers and torpedo bombers are pinned or destroyed. American accounts later call it the Great Mariana's Turkey Shoot. The name is grotesque and clinical. Turkeys called from the sky, pilots picked off in cascades by skill, equipment, and prediction. Numbers tell the story in blunt terms. Hundreds of Japanese aircraft shot from the sky for minimal American losses. Pilots inexperienced in fleet actions find themselves running into the teeth of a system built to defeat them. A crucial difference is the Hellcat itself. Built to bite and absorb punishment, it met the Zeros not as a lesser challenger, but as an evolved adversary. The Japanese plane, light and maneuverable, could not survive the combined advantage of rugged design, heavier armament, and tactics that forced unfavorable engagements. Where the Japanese doctrine favored dogfighting and skill, the Americans favored coordinated interception and attrition. In June 1944, that doctrine won decisively. And when a plane returns to its carrier, it matters how many lives return with it. In Japan, the pool of seasoned instructors and leaders is dwindling. Each loss resonates far beyond the aircraft itself. Each pilot lost is a lesson gone. By late morning, the air is full of burning plumes and descending wreckage. Survivors bail out into the sea, and rescue ships pick up the broken. The Japanese carriers tremble with the knowledge that their strikes have been nullified and that they have spent precious aircraft in doing so. Back below decks, officers who had projected confidence now face calamitous reports. Aircraft lost in numbers they cannot easily replace.
Fuel tanks hit by torpedoes make future sorties impossible. The hour of the Japanese gamble is passing, and the cost is already written in smoke.
The turkey shoot, when numbers met sensors. As the morning wears on, the ocean becomes a scoreboard of loss. Japanese formations, once proud, begin to look ragged. Planes missing, leaders gone, cohesion shredded. American fighters, guided by radar, pick and choose their engagements. They meet the attackers in the air, not in a last-ditch melee over decks. In the wide blue expanse, Hellcats hit formations at range. Zeros are forced into defensive turns, where they lose speed and become easy prey. The slaughter is efficient because it is engineered. Fighter direction officers coordinate swarms of interceptors. Anti-aircraft fire blankets the sea near carriers. Torpedo runs that might have found weakness are cut down by superior early warning and counter-maneuver. And for the Japanese, the human dimension remains stark. The Americans did not gloat over the fallen. For them, the battle was an engineered mercy. Fewer own losses, lives spared by systems that worked. For the Japanese, the survivors carry guilt and a fast emptying pool of experience. The war's future is now less about daring moves and more about the cold arithmetic of replacement, training, and fuel. As the smoke clears, carriers burn and sink, and survivors float in life rafts. The naval balance shifts in a single day. The long ascendancy Japan once enjoyed in carrier warfare begins to crumble into memory. And behind that tactical victory lurks a strategic wound. Japan's capacity to wage a carrier war is now grievously compromised.
Watch the names sink into history. Taiho, Shokaku, Hiyo. Carriers that once carried pride and pilots now list and disappear beneath a merciless sea. The sound of dropping anchors and the creak of hull plating give way to an underwater silence that keeps the names of the lost. These are not just vessels, they are repositories of tactics, leaders, and training cultures. Aboard the Taiho, survivors recall moments of heat and confusion, compartments shuddering, alarms blaring, firefighting teams racing through smoke-choked corridors. The carrier's armored deck, designed to resist bombs, could not withstand the internal horror of aviation fuel feeding fires from within. On the Shokaku, pilots remember scrambling, the pounding of boots down ladders, the sight of the sea taking equipment they had just prepared to launch. Those memories, burned into men's faces, become testimony to the price of failing to control the larger elements of war. Japan tries to explain the losses with courage and ritual. Admirals write formal entries, telegraphs are sent home, and sailors compose notes folded into pockets. Meanwhile, the men who survive stitch together narratives of human tenacity, captains refusing to abandon the bridge, engineers somehow rerouting power to pumps, medics standing in smoke to pull men from flooded hatches. But for the strategic mind, the loss is clinical and final. Without carriers, Japan's ability to mount coordinated offensive operations collapses. The combined weight of sunk carriers, lost squadrons, and fuel shortages means the Imperial Navy can no longer project the same power it once did.
In place of projection comes preservation, an attempt to shield what remains rather than risk it. Across the Pacific, in American command centers, dispatches arrive like proof of a calculation finally realized. The investment in radar, in training, in submarines, in mass production, these had combined into an unbeatable defensive sword. Admiral Mitcher's orders become the new grammar of naval warfare. The Americans will not simply react to Japanese moves, they will set the tempo and scope of engagements going forward. The practical consequences are immediate. With carrier aviation crippled, Japan cannot provide adequate air cover for its convoys or for island defenses. The front shrinks toward the homeland. Saipan falls. Tinian and Guam follow. From these new airfields, American strategic aviation will range toward Japan itself. B-29s that will find bases to take off from within months. Names sink, but history keeps speaking. The day the carriers went down is read later as a pivot, not the first loss, but the one that finally breaks the logic of Japan's naval strategy. The architects of that logic had believed in single battles to compensate for industrial inferiority. On June 19th, that belief was shown a costly illusion.
Collapse of strategy, from gamble to desperation. Strategy is more than plans on paper. It is the alignment of resources, doctrine, morale, and time. Japan's gamble imposed a premium on a decisive outcome. If it failed, the country would not have the industrial depth or pilot reservoir to recover quickly. That failure arrived in a single brutal day. By June 20th, reality sets in. Japan's high command scrambles to reevaluate options. Shore up island defenses, conserve fuel, hide remaining capital ships. Plans once offensive become defensive. The notion of drawing the U.S. into a climactic naval duel fades into the need to protect dwindling homeland resources. This shift is not simply operational, it is psychological. The language of the Admiralty changes from "we will strike" to "we must preserve." The tone in signal rooms becomes smaller, more careful. Pride becomes prudence. The human cost of that strategic collapse is both immediate and long-term. Veteran pilots who die in that morning's slaughter cannot be printed out of factories. They are mentors gone, the living textbooks of carrier warfare. Replacing them is not a matter of metal and rivets, but of hours and experience. Japan's flight schools cannot accelerate wisdom. Additionally, the loss of carriers transforms Japanese naval posture. Without sustained carrier aviation, surface fleets become vulnerable to air attack from land bases and American carriers. Supply convoys, already long and exposed, become easier to interdict. The ability to contest American advances at sea shrinks day by day. The operation's failure also hastens desperate improvisations inside Japan. The leadership debates kamikaze and other extreme measures, driven less than logic than by the raw arithmetic of losses. The Navy, which trained in precision, now contemplates sacrifice as strategy. That shift marks a grim waypoint in the arc of the war, a move from conventional tactical ingenuity to measures born of scarcity and despair. For the Allies, the day becomes a catalyst.
Saipan's capture brings airfields for strategic bombing. The loss of Japanese carrier aviation removes a critical counter to American carrier operations, and the momentum swings towards sustained offensive operations across island chains. American planners, now empowered, press the attack with more calculated ruthlessness. We can say the outcome of one day did not single-handedly win the Pacific, but it broke a core Japanese plan, the belief that a single decisive carrier battle could negate American industrial and technological power. The defeat forced a strategic reorientation that Japan never truly healed from. In the months after, historians will call that day the moment Japan's fate tilted irreversibly. Admirals would later write private entries admitting the shock of seeing a plan evaporate under the combined pressure of radar, production, training, and the quiet work of submarines. They would recall how hope had been measured on the simple sheet of a chart, and how those lines meant less against a sea of modern advantages than they had imagined.
Aftermath and legacy. Industry made victory inevitable. When modern historians ask why Japan lost the Pacific, they return to a handful of truths converging: industrial scale, training programs, technology integration, and logistical reach. June 19, 1944 is a day where all those truths came into concentrated focus. The Marianas turkey shoot is not merely an aerial triumph, it is the proof that industrial capacity coupled with doctrine and reconnaissance can make the difference between survival and collapse. Consider production. American factories could build fighters and replace losses faster than Japan could train replacements. Consider training. U.S. flight schools were producing pilots with more hours and exposure to combat tactics. Consider technology. Radar and the Hellcat combined to erase the advantage of surprise. Consider logistics. Submarines cut fuel lines and left carriers less able to respond. All these elements converged on a single morning to shatter Japan's calculation. The human stories matter. Sailors and pilots on both sides kept faith and showed courage. Men fought with discipline and in many cases with the knowledge that the odds had hardened against them. The men of the Taiho and Shokaku fought with honor, as did the American crews who rescued survivors and mourned losses. The moral of the day is not cruelty, but a recognition of the machinery of war and the people who must step into it. Strategically, the day redefined what naval power meant in the atomic age to come. It taught navies that information, radar, code-breaking, and reconnaissance was as crucial as armor. It taught that industrial endurance could turn attrition into victory. And perhaps most important, it showed that an empire's pride could be undone not only by battlefield defeats, but by the slow arithmetic of resources. In the years after the war, survivors from both sides would write, testify, and lecture. They would parse the tactical missteps and the strategic failings, but their accounts always returned to the same truth. Japan's gamble in 1944 was brave, but it relied on conditions that no longer existed for them. The U.S. machine at sea had matured, and industry had made certain outcomes increasingly likely. If you listen to the sea now, it will not speak in maps or charts. It will murmur names: Taiho, Shokaku, and the rustle of pages from historians who still argue the margins. The war's mechanics are technical, but the core lesson is human. Victory in modern war requires more than courage. It demands the ability to replenish, to learn, to integrate technology and people, to turn industrial might into tactical advantage. June 19, 1944 was, in that sense, a hinge. It is a reminder that in modern conflict, the ability to sustain war, to produce, train, and adapt often matters more than a single brilliant attack. Japan's strategy was not wrong in principle, it was simply an answer to a war that had changed underneath its feet. As the Pacific settles into silence in the egg-shaped horizon, we can measure the legacy in more than ships sunk or planes burned. We measure it in the way nations learn the limits of single gambits when faced by industrial depth. We measure it in the names of the fallen and the faces of the survivors. And we remember that one day, one terrible, decisive day, broke a strategy and helped make victory for America more than a hope. It became an industrial fact.
Before we close, one important note. This story is built on real historical events, but some scenes have been dramatized or reconstructed for narrative flow. Not every moment happened exactly as described, and that's important. History is not a perfect recording. Sometimes documents conflict, sometimes memories fade, and sometimes the truth is bigger than any single report. So while the facts of this battle remain unchanged, the intelligence breakthrough, the destruction of Japan's 1944 strategy, and the collapse of their naval ambitions, some dialogue and visuals have been shaped to help you feel the reality these men lived through, to bring you into their world, not just list dates on a page. Because the Pacific War wasn't just strategy. It was fear. It was sacrifice. It was human. And if you want more stories like this, the hidden turning points, the impossible decisions, the moments that shaped empires, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter of World War II history brought to life. Thank you for watching. And remember, history lives on when we tell it well.